Why did she feel like her entire career had been reduced to one word? The meeting that morning had left her hollow and humiliated. Her boss had said it without blinking. Theoretical, like a verdict, as if years of flawless models late. Nights and million-dollar optimizations meant nothing because she'd never applied it in the real world. Sarah Chun sat frozen in her cubicle, the fluorescent hum loud enough to drown her thoughts. She'd been passed over for a promotion again. 3 years of perfect reviews. And she was still the analyst no one wanted to risk putting in charge. Her email inbox still glowed with the rejection she couldn't delete. That's when her phone buzzed, a text from Jake. Not a question. Not even a greeting. Just a challenge. But you can't solve this equation in real life. Meet me at Blackwater Range, 6 p.m. Bring your calculator. Attached, a photo of her rifle so massive it could have been from a movie set and a target. So far away, it looked like a speck in the desert. She almost laughed. She'd never held a gun in her life. In her world, suburban Seattle, academic parents. Textbooks stacked like furniture. Guns belonged to history documentaries, not her. Hands. But Jake had been a Marine sniper before private security. He lived in a world where skill meant survival, where the math she loved could mean life or death. Still, she knew what this was. A dare. One designed to prove, maybe to both of them, that she wasn't built for it. And yet, something in her tightened. That tiny, infuriating word from her boss still echoed in her head. Theoretical. Jake's challenge dug right into the bruise. If she could forecast market shifts with a dozen variables, why couldn't she calculate? The arc of a bullet? Ballistics was just applied physics. And if she failed, at least it would be her choice, not someone else's verdict. By the time the elevator doors closed, she'd already decided. Have you ever stepped into a place you knew instantly wasn't built for you? The Blackwater Range didn't feel like a public facility. It felt like a fortress. Tall observation towers, weather stations, desert stretching for miles until it kissed the mountains. Sarah's sedan looked like a toy among the tactical trucks. She spotted Jake by the main building, his grin wide and unhelpful. He led her past a group of men adjusting scopes on rifles that looked more like surgical instruments than weapons. Their conversations were pure code, ballistic coefficients, molecular adjustments, atmospheric density, words she recognized in theory. But here, they were alive. That, Jake said, pointing into the shimmering distance, is your target? She squinted. The speck was so far she could barely tell if it was metal or stone. 2,950 meters, he said, almost savoring the number. Nearly 2 miles, Rodriguez. The head instructor appeared with the air of someone who had seen every kind of overconfidence. So, you're the mathematician? The way he said, it made it sound like a flaw. I don't know shooting, Sarah admitted, but I know physics. He laughed, not cruelly, but like he'd already written the ending. Still, he led her to the observation platform and let her see through the spotting scope. The steel plate looked smaller than a dinner plate, even magnified. Rodriguez began explaining all the variables: wind, temperature, humidity, Earth's rotation. But where he saw instinct and years of experience, Sarah saw an equation begging to be solved. What's the muzzle velocity? She asked. His eyebrows rose. About 2,850 feet per second. Ballistic coefficients .738. She was already calculating. Why were people stopping to watch? Sarah barely noticed the quiet gathering around her. Jake and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Her questions were too sharp, her mental math too quick. Wind speed from the southwest, 12 miles per hour. Gusting to 15, temperature 73. Pressure, 2,985. Elevation, 4,000 feet. She translated each into its mathematical weight. Air density, drift, bullet drop. Rodriguez, almost testing her, added, target's 47 feet higher than your firing position. She nodded without looking up. Simple projectile mechanics. When he handed her the rifle, just to feel it, Sarah felt its weight in her arms, not as a weapon, but as an instrument of precision. The scope's adjustment turrets were just dials for a physical equation. Each quarter-minute of angle was about 3/4 of an inch. At that distance, she was already adjusting in her head. "What's the twist rate?" she asked. Suddenly, Rodriguez actually blinked. 1 in 10 inches, he replied. "Gyroscopic stability," she murmured, and went way back to her calculator. Could she even hold steady enough? Sarah slid behind the rifle, the bipod legs, biting into the bench, through the scope. The target floated like a postage stamp in a sea of heat mirage. She felt the crosshairs pulse with each heartbeat. Rodriguez's voice was low. "Trigger should surprise you, steady, straight back." She broke the wind into components. The crosswind alone would push the bullet over 18 inches off course. In 4.2 seconds of flight, anything could happen, but if every factor was accounted for. Elevation 32 minutes up, windage 4 minutes right. Rodriguez checked his ballistic computer. She was within 1 click. He said nothing. Sarah exhaled slowly, waiting for that stillness between breaths. She squeezed. What can you do in 42 seconds? The rifle roared, jolting her shoulder. Dust leapt into the air. She lost sight of the target entirely. Somewhere downrange, a bullet was cutting through wind and heat and distance, chasing numbers she trusted more than her own hands. Then, a sound, not loud, but clean. The ring of steel. The spotting scope confirmed it. Center hit. Dead center. No one spoke. Rodriguez's voice came out like a confession. "That's not possible." But it was. Witnesses had seen every moment. Phones were already out, recording the replay. A complete novice had just hit a target that seasoned snipers took months to master. Jake laughed, almost in disbelief. "I told you," he said, but Sarah barely heard him. Her hand still rested on the rifle. Her mind was caught between the math and the miracle. Can one moment rewrite who you are? The video hit social media within hours. A Navy SEAL at a nearby range posted it with the caption, "Math genius destroys sniper record on first try." It spread fast through shooting circles, military forums, news feeds. Some called it a fluke. Others defended it with witness accounts. By the next day, Sarah's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The Pentagon's Advanced Marksmanship Unit wanted a meeting. Universities wanted her for research. Companies offered sponsorships. Her boss, the one who had called her work theoretical, asked her to reconsider the promotion. She handed him her resignation. Was this what it felt like to finally be seen? Sarah launched Chun Analytics within a month. Clients ranged from military training programs to professional sports teams to Hollywood studios. She began collaborating with neuroscientists on the cognitive parallels between math and marksmanship. Her case became a talking point at conferences, proof that skills could cross boundaries faster than anyone expected. The shot was still controversial online. Some refused to believe it. But those who'd been there didn't care about arguments on forums. They'd heard the steel sing. Years later, she still keeps a photo of that target, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That day, she learned her skills were never just theoretical. They were a language, one the world didn't always know how to listen to until it rang out. Sharp and undeniable. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She didn't breathe. Not really. It was as if the desert itself had stopped to listen. The ring of steel still hung in the air, fragile and perfect, like it might shatter if anyone spoke too soon. Through the scope, the target was just still. No smoke, no flash. Just a new, raw mark where there hadn't been one before. Her finger loosened on the trigger. She let the stock settle against the bench, and only then realized her shoulder ached from the recoil. Dust swirled lazily in the air around her, catching the evening light, making the scene look more like a memory than something unfolding in real time. "Center," Rodriguez said, his voice low, almost reverent. He adjusted the spotting scope. Again, as if the glass might correct itself if he'd somehow been mistaken. Dead center, the murmur started somewhere behind her, small at first, then growing, boots shifting on gravel. A quiet laugh of disbelief from someone who had probably tried and failed that shot himself. Sarah didn't look up. She kept her eye on that impossibly small speck of steel in the distance, feeling an odd mix of pride and dread twist in her stomach. Jake was the first to move. His hand came down on her back, hard, like he was knocking the wind out of her. "I knew it," he said, grinning wide enough to split his face. You see? Math works in the real world." Sarah tried to smile, but her throat was tight. The adrenaline made it hard to focus on any one thought. Her mind kept replaying the sequence. Wind, drop, time to target, 4.2 seconds. And then that perfect, impossible sound. Rodriguez stepped closer, his boots crunching against the concrete. "You ever even held a rifle before today?" She shook her head, his eyes narrowed. That's not supposed to happen." From somewhere farther back, another voice cut in, low, skeptical. "No way." That was luck. A tall man in desert camo stepped forward, his arms crossed. "I've been training for that distance for months. Nobody nails it on the first trigger pull." Sarah finally looked up, blinking against the brightness. There were more people here than she realized. Half the range, maybe. Some with crossed arms, some with phones out, recording her like she was a rare animal sighting. "It wasn't luck," Rodriguez said, still watching her. "Not with those adjustments. I checked her math against my ballistic computer. She was dead on before she even touched the trigger." The man in camo didn't look convinced. "Still, theory's one thing. Pulling the shot is another." Jake stepped between them before Sarah could answer. "Theory is the thing. You think you can guess your way into a center hit from 2 miles out? Not a chance. This," he jabbed a finger towards Sarah, "was calculated." The argument was swelling, voices overlapping. Sarah stood slowly, easing the rifle back into its rack. She didn't want to fight about it. Didn't even want to defend it. The numbers had already done that. Rodriguez waved the others down. "All right, that's enough. Anyone still whining can try to beat it. Plate's still warm." He turned back to Sarah. "Come with me." The inside of the main building smelled faintly of oil and dust. Maps lined the walls, marking distances in red ink. Rodriguez led her to a table stacked with training logs, scribbled calculations, and a steel notebook the size of a dictionary. He set it down, flipping it open to a clean page. "Write it out," he said. Sarah blinked. "Write what out?" "Everything. How you got to your numbers, step by step." She hesitated, then sat. The pen felt almost too small after handling the rifle. She started with muzzle velocity, then bullet coefficient, then wind drift broken into cross and head components. Rodriguez leaned over the table, watching her hand move. When she paused, he said quietly, "You accounted for Coriolis?" She nodded without looking up. "Half a click east at this latitude." A slow whistle escaped him. "I have guys who don't even remember Coriolis until after they've missed." By the time she finished, 3 more instructors had wandered over. Scanning her notes, one of them, tall, with a Marine Corps patch, let out a low chuckle. "You didn't just luck into it. This is tighter than my range book." Jake grinned at her. "Told you she was dangerous." The sun was dipping low when she finally stepped outside again. The desert had gone from blinding gold to soft amber, shadows stretching long over the gravel. Jake walked beside her in silence for a few moments, then said, "You know this is gonna blow up, right?" She shrugged. "It was one shot," he said. "That half the guys here couldn't make on their best day, and half of them are gonna post about it before dinner." She didn't answer. Her mind was still turning over the moment. Not in disbelief, but in analysis. Every variable she'd accounted for, every assumption that had held true. The calculation was clean, perfect, even, and yet something in her was uneasy. Why me? She asked finally. Jake gave her a sideways look. Because you're the only person I know who could take the math that seriously, and I knew if I dangled the right challenge in front of you, you'd bite. Sarah shook her head. Feels like... You set me up. Damn right I did. He smiled. You've been sitting in that cubicle acting like you're stuck there forever. I just wanted to see what you'd do if the problem was worth solving. By the time Sarah got home that night, her phone was already buzzing nonstop. Unknown numbers, texts from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Jake's prediction was right. Someone had posted the video. She opened it with a strange mix of curiosity and dread. It was shaky footage from behind the firing line. Her figure small against the bench, business blouse fluttering slightly in the wind. The report of the rifle, the long pause, then the metallic ring and the crowd's stunned silence. A single caption overlaid. Civilian nails 2,950 meters shot. First try. The comments section was already a war zone. Some were pure awe, others, not so much. This is fake. No one does that first shot. Lucky, I could do it if I had her numbers. Who is she? That she's military and lying about it. She closed it. The number calling her now had a D. C. Area code. She let it go to voicemail. The next morning at Meridian Analytics. She barely made it to her desk before her boss intercepted her. He looked nervous, like a man trying to navigate a sudden PR problem. I saw the video, he said, forcing a smile. Quite the accomplishment. We may have underestimated the practical applications of your skill set. Sarah watched him, expression unreadable. I'd like to revisit the promotion discussion, he continued. Perhaps even, I'm resigning, she said. He blinked. What? Effective immediately. The smile faltered. Sarah, let's be reasonable. She picked up her bag. Reasonable was 3 years ago. You missed it. She didn't wait for his reply. That afternoon, she signed the paperwork for Chun. Analytics. No cubicle, no fluorescent lights. Just her laptop, a quiet rented office, and a whiteboard she immediately filled with equations. Within a week, her inbox was full, not from recruiters, but from clients. Some were military units looking to refine long-range training protocols. Some were law enforcement agencies curious about predictive shooting models. One was a film studio in California, asking if she'd consult on a sniper sequence in an upcoming thriller. Jake stopped by on her second day. So, how does it feel? Sarah didn't look up from her equations. Like the problem just got bigger. He grinned. Good. Means you're not done yet. At night, she still replayed the shot, not out of disbelief anymore, but to study it, like a favorite proof. She could run through in her head without looking at the paper. She could hear the wind in the microphone of someone's phone. Could almost feel the way the trigger broke clean under her finger. Could still measure the silence before the steel sang. The target was still out there at Blackwater, and though she didn't plan to go back anytime soon, she knew it was marked. Forever. A dent that wasn't supposed to exist, made by someone who was never supposed to be holding that rifle in the first place. It wasn't just a shot. It was the first time she'd felt completely unarguable, and she wasn't about to let that be the last. The morning after she resigned, the calls began again. Not polite inquiries, not job offers and neatly worded emails. These were voices that didn't introduce themselves before speaking. Voices that expected her to already know who they were. The first was from a man who said only, I work in marksmanship research. He didn't specify which agency. His questions were precise. What equipment, what weather, what calculations. He wanted raw numbers, nothing else. When she hesitated, he said, You may be underestimating the significance of what you did. The second call was from a defense contractor who tried to disguise the pitch as an academic collaboration. The way he said academic made it sound like a joke only he got. By noon, Jake was standing in her doorway. holding 2 paper cups of coffee like an offering. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "I've seen something," she murmured, setting her phone face down. He handed her the cup. "Pentagon called yet?" She stared at him. "Why would they?" "They will," he said, shrugging. "Half their elite guys have been trying for that distance all year. You hit it on your first try. They'll want to know if it's repeatable." Sarah didn't answer. But the truth was, she'd already thought about that, whether she could do it again, whether it was a fluke. The knock came the next day. 2 men in suits, one carrying a slim leather folder, the other silent. They introduced themselves only as working with the Advanced Marksmanship Unit. The folder opened to reveal photographs, the kind you couldn't find online. Targets peppered with misses at extreme distances. Data sheets covered in wind charts and temperature logs. "Miss Chun," the first man said, "we'd like you to run through your process in detail." "You already have Rodriguez's range logs," she said. "We do, but logs don't explain." "Instinct. I don't have instinct," she replied flatly. "I have equations." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Equations can be taught. Can they be applied under pressure?" "That's what we're interested in." The second man finally spoke, his voice quieter. "What you did, if we can systemize it, could change how long-range engagement is trained. Could save lives." Sarah's gaze dropped to the photos. The steel plates were dented and scarred, most shots scattering inches, sometimes feet, from center. Each miss, she realized, represented not just a failed attempt, but a moment where a target in real life might still be standing. "I'm not military," she said. "You don't have to be," the first man replied. "You just have to help us understand what happened in your head that day." That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table long after midnight. Notebook open, coffee going cold. She wasn't writing equations. She was writing questions. If she taught them, what would they do with it? Would it be used only for defense, or could it be adapted into something darker? She thought about her parents, academics to the core, pacifists almost by instinct. She thought about the quiet conversations she'd overheard growing up, about research being co-opted by defense industries. Jake's voice echoed in her head. Could save lives, but in the same breath, another thought intruded. Could take them, too. By morning, she had her answer, or at least, the start of one. She called the Pentagon contact and agreed to a meeting. But on her terms, observation only, no demonstrations, no live fire, just data. The meeting was held in a building without signs. Its hallways too narrow for the weight of the conversations happening inside them. Sarah was led past rooms where maps glowed under dim light, past walls covered in photographs she didn't want to study too closely. The briefing room smelled faintly of paper and coffee grounds. On the screen at the front, her shot from Blackwater was frozen mid-frame. Her, hunched behind the rifle, wind tugging at her sleeve. An officer introduced himself as Colonel Danner. His manner was direct, his eyes sharp. "Miss Chun, we're not here to put a rifle in your hands. We're here to put your brain in our process." He gestured to a table stacked with printouts. "These are ballistic solutions generated by our best. They work most of the time, but we believe there's a gap between how our shooters are trained to think and how someone like you approaches a problem." Sarah sat, scanning the data. Some of the numbers were sound. Others had adjustments that seemed arbitrary. Gun instincts that, if wrong, would push around inches off target. "Your calculation at Blackwater," Danner continued, "was within one click of our most advanced computer model. You didn't have that model. You were that model." Jake, sitting in the corner, smirked. "Told you, for 3 hours." Sarah walked them through her thought process, the variables. She prioritized, the ones she ignored, the sequence she used to cross-check results, the way she treated each element not as a separate problem, but as part of a shifting system. Danner listened, expression neutral, the others scribbled notes. Furiously. When she finished, there was a long silence. Finally, he said, "You know, Some people would sell this method for more money than you can imagine. I'm not selling it, she said. Then why are you here? She hesitated, because if someone's going to use this, I'd rather understand how. Outside, the afternoon was blinding. Jake walked beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. You did good in there, he said. I don't know if that's the point, she replied. They'll use it, Jake. I can't control that. You can't control gravity either. Still doesn't mean you ignore it. She didn't answer. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of the steel plate kept appearing in her mind. But this time, it wasn't clean. It was shifting, warping, morphing into something human-shaped. The next week, she started getting messages from people she didn't know. Some were respectful, some were hostile. One email reads simply, "You have no idea what you've just done." Her phone buzzed again. A new number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Chun? The voice was calm, precise. This is Rodriguez. We've had people out here all week trying to beat your shot. Closest anyone's gotten is 4 inches off center, and these aren't rookies. She didn't know what to say, Rodriguez continued. Just thought you'd want to know. Whatever you did, it wasn't luck. She hung up slowly, staring at her hands. The offers kept coming. Contracts, partnerships, speaking engagements, but one message cut through them all. It was from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a cognitive scientist whose work Sarah had read years ago. Your case is exactly what I've been looking for. We're studying high-level problem solving across domains. Chess masters, pilots, surgeons, I think you're the missing piece. Sarah met her in a quiet university office 2 weeks later. Books stacked high, the smell of old paper. Vasquez studied her like a specimen. What you did, the doctor said, wasn't just math, it was transfer. The ability to take mastery from one field and drop it, fully formed, into another. That's rare. Very rare. Sarah sat back. And what do you do with rare? Vasquez smiled faintly. You study it before someone else weaponizes it. On the train ride home, Sarah watched the desert give way to suburbs, then to the city skyline. Her reflection in the window looked almost like someone else. Someone. People were watching now, measuring. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jake. You busy? He asked when she picked up. Depends. There's something you need to see. Rodriguez sent me a video. What is it? He hesitated just long enough to make her uneasy. Someone hit the plate. Her stomach tightened. Center? Not quite. 1.5 inches off. But they were using your numbers. She didn't speak. Jake's voice dropped. Sarah, I think you started something. The video Jake sent was grainy, filmed from the same Blackwater firing line where she'd sat weeks ago. The desert wind was louder in the microphone this time, almost drowning out the muffled voices behind the shooter. She watched as the man in the footage settled behind the rifle, his movements deliberate, his posture practiced. He didn't glance at a ballistic computer, didn't adjust for wind twice, like many shooters did when they were nervous. He simply dialed in the numbers, took the shot, and waited. The plate shuddered. A metallic ping rang out. Rodriguez's voice could be heard faintly. 1.5 inches off center. The camera turned slightly, catching the shooter's face, young, focused, wearing a faint, satisfied smile. Jake's voice came over the phone, quiet. That's the 3rd one this week to use your method. Sarah's stomach tightened. How do you know it's mine? Because they didn't just copy the adjustments. They copied the sequence. That's not normal for long-range shooters. That's your process. She didn't reply, but in her mind, she saw it clearly, the neat order of steps she'd laid. Out on Rodriguez's table, the logic that was hers alone, now in someone else's hands. 2 days later, she got an email from someone calling themselves Falcon. No signature, no title, just a subject line. We can do more with your math than you think. The body of the message was worse, bullet points listing scenarios, hostage rescues, counter-sniper operations, each framed as lives saved. At the bottom, a line that stopped her cold. And yes, it works both ways. She closed the laptop hard enough that the coffee cup beside it rattled. When Jake came by that evening, she handed him the printout. "You see this?" she asked. He read it once, expression unreadable, not surprised. "That's all you have to say?" "Sarah, the moment you put something in the world, you lose control of it. Doesn't matter if it's an equation or a rifle." "I didn't put it in the world," she said sharply. "I answered questions in a room." Jake gave her a look, not harsh, but steady. "You think they were going to keep it in that room? You think they were just going to clap, say thanks, and move on?" She turned away, pacing. "I wanted it to help. I wanted it to be useful. It is, to whoever's holding it." The next morning, she found a package outside her office door. No return address. Inside, under layers of brown paper, was a single object. A steel plate, roughly the size of the one from Blackwater. It had a fresh impact crater in the center, dead center. Taped to it was a note. "You move." She sat down. Hard, the plate balanced on her knees. The weight of it was wrong. Too much like the weight of that first moment when the target rang and everyone had looked at her like she was something she didn't recognize. She called Rodriguez. He answered on the second ring. "I heard," he said before she could speak. "You got the plate. Who's sending them?" A pause. Could be anyone. Could be someone trying to prove they can do what you did. Or, his voice lowered, could be someone trying to tell you they've already gone further. Further? In the field, real targets. The silence stretched. "I need to know if that's happening," she said finally. Rodriguez exhaled. "Then you're stepping into something you can't step back out of." That night, she couldn't bring herself to work. The equations on her whiteboard blurred into shapes with no meaning. She found herself standing at her apartment window, looking out at the city lights, wondering which ones hid people who now had her method in their hands. The question that kept circling back wasn't what they could do with it. It was, what would I do if I knew? Her phone buzzed again. A text from Jake. "Meet me at the range tomorrow." No arguments. Blackwater looked different in the early morning light. Colder, less forgiving. Jake was already there. The big rifle set up on a bench, scope cap open. "This isn't about a record shot," he said as she approached. "This is about control. If people are going to use your system, you need to know it inside out, not just on paper, in your own hands." She froze. "You want me to shoot again?" "No," he said. "I want you to shoot until it's yours." Her first instinct was to refuse. The shot had been a statement, a single, impossible moment. Repeating it felt like trying to rewrite something that was already finished. But as she settled behind the rifle, feeling the cold metal against her cheek, she realized something else. If she didn't own it, someone else would. They worked for hours. Not on distance, but on discipline. Jake made her fire at closer plates. First, demanding precision so tight that misses could only be measured in millimeters. "You think the math will always save you," he said at one point. It won't. Sometimes the variables change mid-flight. You have to feel that, not just solve it. By midday, her shoulder was sore, her fingers raw from loading rounds. But her grouping was tighter than before, almost unnervingly so. When they finally set the target back at 2,950 meters, she didn't feel the same rush as last time. There was no crowd, no witnesses, just the math, the wind, and the quiet certainty that this wasn't about proving it anymore. The plate rang again. Jake lowered his spotting scope. "Now it's yours," on the drive home. She thought about the difference between that first shot and this one. The first had been a challenge. This one felt like a claim. The package with the plate was still sitting in her office when she returned. She picked it up, set it on the desk, and looked at it one last time before sliding it into a locked drawer. Some things, she realized, weren't meant to be displayed. A week later, Vasquez called. "I think you should see something," the doctor said. Sarah met her in the university lab. On the screen in front of them was a simulation, not a rifle shot, but a series of predictive models running in real time. Each used our method as the base algorithm. "This is from a defense lab in Europe," Vasquez said. "They've adapted your math for drone targeting." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Already?" "They didn't need you. They needed the idea." She stared at the screen, tiny. Blinking targets appeared and disappeared as the model calculated trajectories. There was no ring of steel, no wind in the microphone. Just cold, perfect impact points. Vasquez studied her. "You can't stop it, but you can decide if you're going to shape it." That night, Sarah stood at her whiteboard again, but instead of plotting ballistic curves, she started drawing lines between variables she'd never considered linking before. Ways to limit precision, to build unpredictability into the equation without losing effectiveness for defense. A kind of mathematical watermark, something that, if embedded deeply enough, only she could strip away. She didn't know if it would work, but it was the first time since Blackwater that she felt like she wasn't just reacting, and for now, that was enough. It started with a headline, not in the major outlets, at least, not yet. A small regional paper in a language she didn't speak. Jake sent her the link with no comment, just a word. "Watch." She clicked the translated version. "Sniper neutralizes hostage threat from 2,800 meters. The article was sparse, but the details clawed at her. A single shot, moving target, crosswind almost identical to the one at Blackwater. The shooter had been using a new calculation system provided by Allied advisors. She didn't need to guess whose system that was. By midday, it had spread to the bigger outlets. The footage wasn't as clean as the Blackwater video. Grainy, zoomed in from what looked like a phone camera. But the shot landed. Even without sound, Sarah could see the hostage pulled to safety moments later. Jake called within minutes. "They used it," he said. "I know. And it worked." Her fingers tightened on the phone. "That's not the point, Jake." "It is the point," he said. "That hostage is alive because your math put a bullet where it needed to be. And next time, who decides where it needs to be?" Silence. 2 days later, Vasquez arrived at her office unannounced. She shut the door behind her, eyes sharp. "They're testing it," she said without preamble. "Testing what?" "Your watermark, the variation you embedded. They've noticed the anomaly in certain calculations. They think it's a glitch." Sarah sat back in her chair. "It's not a glitch, I know, but if they figure that out, they'll strip it out, and then your control is gone," Sarah finished. Vasquez stepped closer. "I'm going to be blunt. You can't just hope they don't notice. You either make it unremovable, or you make it useless." That night, Sarah pulled out the steel plate from her locked drawer. The dent at the center was still clean, untouched by rust. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the depth, the edges. This was what they wanted. The perfection, the certainty. She thought about that first day at Blackwater, how she'd felt when the plate rang. The rush, the clarity, the proof that her skills could cross the boundary between theory and action. And now, it wasn't hers anymore. The next week brought an invitation she didn't expect, from Colonel Danner. "We have a live test scenario," he said. "We want you to see it. No pressure to participate. Just observe." She almost said no, but the part of her that couldn't stop running equations in her head needed to see it. They flew her to a training facility deep in the desert. It wasn't Blackwater. This was bigger, harsher. Structures designed to mimic urban environments, wind towers placed to generate unpredictable gusts. Danner met her at the edge of the firing line. "We've set a 2,900-meter target in the urban zone. Shooters using your method. Full adjustments." "Whose?" "The shooter?" she asked, He hesitated. A candidate who's been in training 6 months. Never cleared this distance before. From the observation tower, Sarah watched the shooter set up. The wind was erratic, shifting enough to make her own fingers itch. For a calculator, she glanced at the readouts scrolling on a nearby monitor. The numbers matched her sequence exactly, except not quite. There it was. The watermark. The subtle alteration in windage drift she built in. The shooter adjusted, dialed the shot, and fired. Through the scope feed, she saw the bullet hit. Close, but not perfect. 2 inches right. Enough to miss a center mark, but still a lethal hit on a human target. Danner's jaw tightened. Close, he muttered. Too close for my comfort. Sarah kept her eyes on the screen. The watermark had worked, slightly degrading the precision, without destroying it. But Danner's reaction told her everything. They'd keep testing until they removed it. On the flight back, she couldn't shake the image of that 2-inch miss. How even an imperfection designed to protect could still kill. Jake met her at the airport. How bad? They're getting close, she said. Too close. He didn't press. But later, over takeout containers in her apartment, he finally asked, "So what are you gonna do?" She stared at the skyline beyond her window. "I don't know if I should burn it or own it." A week later, someone made the choice for her. She woke to a barrage of messages, news alerts, missed calls, Vasquez's name flashing over and over. She answered on the 3rd ring. "They used it," Vasquez said, voice tight. "Not for a rescue. For a strike." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Where?" "I can't say on this line, but you need to know it was clean. Too clean. They've stripped the watermark." She sat down hard. "How?" "They reverse engineered it. Ran parallel tests until they found the drift factor. It's gone." The line went quiet for a moment before Vasquez added, "This is the moment you decide. You either step into this and shape it, or you walk away and let them run with it." For the rest of the day, she didn't move from her desk. Her laptop screen was split between 2 windows, one with a news feed of the strike's aftermath, the other with a blank document where she'd started typing months ago. Project variables, black water sequence. By midnight, the blank wasn't blank anymore. She'd started outlining something new, not an improvement, not a refinement, a countermeasure, a way to detect and mislead any calculation based on her method. Jake called around 1 a.m. "You're still up?" "I'm rewriting the rules," she said. There was a long pause. "If you do that, you'll be in it for real. No pretending you're just the math girl anymore." She looked at the steel plate on her desk. "I was in it the moment the target rang." The first version was crude. A few altered variables hidden deep in the equation's backbone. Not enough to throw an amateur off, but enough to warp the results for anyone who thought they understood her system. It wasn't elegant, but Sarah didn't need elegance. She needed speed. She worked at night, blinds drawn, whiteboard crowded with numbers and arrows. By day, she acted like nothing had changed, answering client emails, taking innocuous consulting calls. But under the surface, every move was about one thing: making her math dangerous only to those who misused it. The trick was subtlety. A countermeasure too obvious would be stripped out in days. Too weak, and it wouldn't matter. She had to design something that passed as a natural ballistic adjustment, a ghost in the math no one could quite catch. 3 days in, Jake stopped by unannounced. He stood at the door for a moment, scanning the wall of equations like a man reading a foreign language. "You're building a weapon," he said quietly. Sarah didn't turn from the board. "I'm building a failsafe. Failsafes fail," he said. She finally faced him. "So do people. That's why this has to live in the math, not in whoever's." Holding the rifle, he walked closer, hands in his pockets. "If they find out you're rewriting the system, you'll be on their radar. The wrong side of it." "I'm already on their radar," she said. "I just haven't given them a reason to push the button yet. The test had to be quiet. No one at Blackwater, no familiar ranges. She and Jake drove 4 hours into the desert to a private strip of land he knew from his security work. No cameras, no records. She set up the rifle herself, this time, dialing the scope with the altered sequence. The air was sharp and dry. The wind just enough to matter. At 2,950 meters, the plate looked almost invisible. She ran the numbers twice. Then once more out of habit, Jake lay beside her, spotting scope ready. Whenever you're set. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. Back, the shot arcing invisibly into the distance. The plate rang, but faintly, off-center by 3 inches. Safe miss, she said under her breath. Jake grunted. Still lethal if you're aiming at a person. Not if the shooter doesn't know they've drifted, she said. They'll correct the wrong variable, and the next shot will walk itself further out. He lowered the scope, giving her a long look. You know this works both ways. If you hand this to someone you do trust, you'd better strip the ghost out first. She nodded, already thinking about the encryption key she'd need to embed for that. A week later, the call came from Colonel Danner. Miss Chun, we'd like to bring you in for a series of advanced scenario tests. Multiple shooters, variable environments. Your system's in active deployment now. We need to standardize it. Sarah hesitated. You mean you want? Need to hand over the full working model. That's one way to put it. And if I say no? His voice cooled. Then we standardize without you. And we'll assume you're holding on to something we should know about. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly, but from the knowledge that the game had shifted. They weren't asking any more. That night, she met Vasquez in a quiet corner of a hotel lobby. They're on to you, Vasquez said without preamble. Sarah nodded. They want me to deliver the full model if I refuse. They'll strip it from whatever fragments they already have. Vasquez leaned forward. Then you need to decide. Do you give them the clean version or the ghosted one? Sarah stared into her coffee. If I give them the clean version, I have no control. If I give them the ghosted one, they'll deploy it thinking it's perfect, Vasquez finished. And in some scenarios, that margin could mean the difference between a mission's success and failure. The words hung there, heavy. 2 days later, she flew to the training facility. Danner met her at the gate, his expression tight. Glad you decided to join us, he said. She followed him through a maze of halls until they reached a large control room. Live feeds filled the walls, shooters on windswept hillsides. Urban rooftops, mountain passes. Every one of them was running calculations based on her method. Today's about validation, Danner said. We prove the numbers work in all environments. Then we lock it in as the standard. Sarah's eyes scanned the feeds. The wind in one mountain scenario was erratic, the kind that would push a ghosted equation into a clear miss. May I observe the calculations? She asked. Danner's gaze sharpened. Why? Because math isn't universal without context. He hesitated, then nodded to a nearby tech. Data began scrolling across one of the screens. There it was, her watermark still intact. The first shot in the mountain scenario missed exactly as predicted. 2 inches off, the shooter compensating in the wrong direction for the next attempt. Danner's jaw tightened. Run it again, he ordered. The second shot landed further off. The shooter frowned, clearly confused. This, Sarah said quietly, is what happens when you think math doesn't change with the situation. Danner's head turned sharply toward her. Is there something you're not telling me, Miss Chun? She held his gaze. Only that perfect numbers in the wrong hands are worse than bad ones. When she left the facility that evening, Jake was waiting in the rental car. You didn't give them the clean version, he said. No. You. No, that's going to paint a target on you. She leaned back in the seat, closing her eyes. Better a target than a traitor. That night in her hotel room, she received an email from an address she didn't recognize. It contained no text, just an attachment. She opened it against her better judgment. It was a video, timestamped 2 hours earlier, Rodriguez standing at a range, speaking into the camera. "They know," he said. "They know about the ghost." The screen went black. The video ended abruptly, the black screen holding for just long enough to feel deliberate. Sarah stared at it, pulse ticking in her neck. She replayed the clip twice. Rodriguez's expression wasn't casual. It was tight, urgent, the kind of look he used when he wanted someone to know there wasn't time for a debate. She called his number immediately. No answer. The second attempt went straight to voicemail. By the third, the line was dead. Jake showed up less than an hour later, having driven through the night from his latest job. He found her sitting at the hotel desk, laptop still open to the frozen frame of Rodriguez's face. "What happened?" he asked. She told him, word for word. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "If Rodriguez says they know, it means they're already moving to strip it. And if they're stripping it, they've decided they don't need you anymore." "That's not the part that worries me," Sarah said. "It's the part where Rodriguez thought I needed to know right now." Jake didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, "You think he's in trouble?" "I think he wouldn't send that unless he was already past the point of stopping it." The call from Danner came before dawn. "We need to talk," he said, not a request. She met him at the same facility as before. This time, no pretense of courtesy. He was waiting just inside the gate, coat collar turned up against the cold. "You've been playing games," he said, without greeting. Sarah stood still. "If you mean protecting my work, I mean sabotaging it," he cut in. "Do you think we wouldn't notice? 2 weeks of live testing, and your formula underperforms in specific conditions? We're not stupid. Then you should have figured out why," she said evenly. His eyes narrowed. "We did, and we know exactly who to blame." They walked into the main control room, where several large monitors displayed a looping replay. Shots missing by just enough to frustrate, never by enough to be called total failures. "This is deliberate," Danner said. "You embedded an instability in your math." Sarah didn't deny it. "A safeguard, so that it only works perfectly when you know how to use it the way it was designed. That safeguard cost us 2 successful outcomes in last week's trials. Or it saved you from thinking you had a perfect system when you didn't." Danner's jaw flexed. "Here's the problem, Miss Chun. If we can't get the clean version from you, we'll build our own. And when we do, you're irrelevant. Worse than irrelevant. You're in the way." Later, in a smaller side room, one of Danner's tech officers pulled her aside. His voice was low, eyes darting toward the hallway. "They've already got people working on stripping it," he said. "But there's talk that your sequence isn't just math, that there's a deeper pattern in there no one's cracked yet." Sarah studied him. "Why are you telling me this?" He hesitated. "Because I think you put it there on purpose. And because if they do crack it, they'll use it without the guardrails. And you? I think maybe you should put in something they can't see at all." The idea followed her back to her hotel. A deeper watermark. Something buried so far inside the structure of the equation that it would look like noise unless you knew where to look. Not a correction this time. Not even a failsafe, a kill switch. She paced the carpet, working through the structure in her head. The ghost had been about drift, a measurable deviation. The kill switch would be about cascade, a variable that once tripped would throw every output into chaos. The wrong wind speed input, the wrong barometric reading, the wrong latitude, and the whole system would quietly collapse into uselessness. But it would have to be subtle enough that no one could isolate it without months of work. She sat down at the desk and started sketching. By the time Jake knocked on the door the next morning, her whiteboard was filled edge to edge. "This is either brilliant," he said after staring for a minute, "or it's the thing that gets you disappeared." "It's the only way to make sure it's mine," she said. "Sarah, you realize If you give them this version, they'll think it's clean, until the day it triggers in the field. I know. And if that happens during an op, they'll know you did it. She didn't answer. The test came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, she was summoned again, this time under the guise of final validation. Danner was in the observation room with 3 other senior officers. We've integrated your latest adjustments. He said, if these runs succeed, we move forward with full adoption. She kept her expression neutral. And if they don't, then we assume you've been wasting our time on the screens. The shooters took position in 3 different environments: desert crosswind, urban canyon, and high-altitude cold. The first 2 ran clean, bullseyes that drew nods from the officers. The third, Sarah saw it before anyone reacted. A subtle shift in wind speed on the monitor, enough to trip the kill switch. The shot missed wide, not by inches, but by feet. Danner's head turned sharply. What was that? One of the techs scrambled for an explanation. Wind spike. Maybe sensor drift. Sarah stayed silent, heart thudding in her chest. Danner didn't take his eyes off her. We'll run it again. They did. The same wind spike, and the same miss. He dismissed the room a few minutes later, but as the others filed out, he stopped her at the door. If I find out you're still protecting this thing, he said quietly, you'll wish you'd never touched a rifle in your life. Back at her hotel, she found an envelope slid under the door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words, handwritten, nice work. No signature. She folded it slowly, slid it into her bag, and sat down on the edge of the bed. Whoever had sent it had been in the observation room, or close enough to know what she'd done. The question was, were they an ally, or someone waiting to see how far she'd go? The knock came just after midnight, not urgent, not hurried. 3 even taps that sounded almost polite. Sarah stood in the dark for a long moment before opening the door. Rodriguez was there, alive, but not the same. His left arm was in a sling, and his eyes had that faraway edge she'd only seen in combat veterans after too many tours. You're hard to find, he said. You didn't make it easy, she replied. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing once at the whiteboard in the corner. Still writing ghosts into the math? She closed the door. You sent me a warning, then you vanished. Had to. They wanted me to help strip your watermark. He dropped into the chair by the desk. I didn't. That didn't make me popular. What happened to your arm? He didn't answer right away. Let's just say not everyone likes people who know when to walk away. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the city filtering in through the glass. Finally, Rodriguez said, I've seen what they're doing with it now. It's not just long-range sniping anymore. They're adapting your math into targeting algorithms for systems that don't even need a human trigger. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Drones, he nodded. Autonomous ones? That kill switch you built? It's the only thing slowing them down. They're still trying to figure out why some runs fail. Her hands curled into fists. If they strip it. They will, he said. Soon, which means you've got 2 choices. Make it permanent, or kill it yourself before they do. Jake arrived the next morning after Rodriguez called him. He listened without interrupting, leaning against the counter while Sarah laid out what she'd learned. Permanent, Jake said finally. If it's the only thing keeping them from using it without you, lock it so deep they'd have to burn the whole thing down to get it out. Rodriguez shook his head. Permanent means it's still out there. Sarah, someday someone will crack it, and when they do, there's no putting it back in the bottle. They both looked at her. You're asking me to choose between killing my own work and letting it live with my fingerprints on it forever, she said quietly. That's exactly what we're asking. Rodriguez said. The decision didn't come quickly. She walked the city for hours, her mind caught in loops. That first day at Blackwater, the rush of seeing the math made real. The first package with the plate, the hostage rescued from 2,800 meters. The drone feed Vasquez had shown her, cold and clinical. Somewhere in the middle, her work had stopped being hers. And yet, she couldn't shake the thought. If she erased it completely, someone else would rebuild it eventually, maybe worse. By the time she returned to her apartment, she knew what she had to do. The next day, she went to the facility unannounced. The guards hesitated, but her name still carried enough weight too. Get her inside. Danner was in his office. He looked up from a file, surprise flickering across his face. I want to see the current working model, she said. He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a secure terminal. Be my guest. She sat down, hand steady. The files were all there, her math, stripped of the watermark, the clean version they'd been chasing. For 30 minutes, she worked silently, fingers moving over the keys. Danner stood behind her, saying nothing. When she was done, she logged out, stood, and faced him. You. And your clean version now. He smiled faintly. That wasn't so hard, was it? No, she said. Not hard at all. She left without looking back. 2 nights later, Jake and Rodriguez were in her apartment when she returned from a late meeting. You didn't, Jake said, reading her face. I did, she replied. I gave them the clean version. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. Why? She set her bag down and walked to the whiteboard, erasing a section of equations to reveal a smaller, almost invisible grid underneath. Because the clean version isn't clean, she said. It looks like it is, runs like it is, but buried. Deep in the sequence, deeper than anything before. There's a failsafe no one will find unless I tell them exactly where to look. Rodriguez stepped closer, eyes scanning the faint marks. You built a shadow inside the shadow. Jake let out a low whistle. That's mean. I like it. Sarah capped the marker. If they use it for defense, it works. If they push it into autonomous targeting, it dies on the first trigger. A week later, the news broke. An overseas Lev-fire drone test had failed spectacularly. Targets missed by margins too wide to explain. Official reports blamed atmospheric interference. Sarah didn't comment. Neither did Rodriguez or Jake. In a quiet office at the university, Vasquez received a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a single line, handwritten. It's safe. For now, months passed, the calls slowed, the offers faded. The story of the civilian sniper became more legend than news. The kind of tale people told at ranges and in classrooms without ever knowing how much more there was to it. Sarah took on other work, projects that had nothing to do with rifles or targeting. But sometimes, late at night, she'd open the drawer where the steel plate still rested. The den in the center was a reminder, not of a shot, but of a moment she'd stepped into a world she hadn't asked for and learned how to survive in it. One evening, Jake asked her if she regretted it. No, she said after a long pause, because I learned something, the most dangerous weapon isn't the rifle or the drone or the math. It's the person who decides where to point it. Rodriguez raised his glass, and the one who decides when to miss. The shot that had started it all had taken 42 seconds from trigger pull to impact. The ripples it made had lasted far longer. Somewhere out there, someone would always try to rebuild what she'd made. But somewhere else, her shadow in the math would be waiting, silent and patient. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.